broadcasting live 4 days a week worldwide
from the sunny beaches of Southern California.
This is ExtremeHealthRadio.com.
Hi, this is Dr. Ed Group from Global Healing Center. I hope you tune in and listen to Justin and Kate's Extreme Health Radio. It will transform your life, and you will get all the best health information you need.
Want an energy boost? Try Pure Hawaiian Spirulina today and feel the difference. Save 25% off your Spirulina order today using the coupon code JUSTIN, JUSTIN, at extremehealthradio.com/Nutrex. That's NUTREX. Well, today I'm flying a little bit solo here. Just want to let everybody know Kate is off doing some errands and she got caught up, so she's going to be joining me here in the studio in just a moment. So we'll have her joining the show in just a moment here. So I want to thank all of you guys for joining us live. The chat room is just completely blowing up here. It's amazing. So thanks to all of you guys for being on live. We appreciate that. And this is episode, let me see here, 263 of Extreme Health Radio. And so for reference, today is Thursday, June 12th, 2014. And we have Mr. Daniel Vitalis with us today. This is going to be a lot of fun. We'll introduce him in just a moment. If you guys would like to follow us on Facebook, we'd love to have you a part of the community and keep up to date with all of our shows, our past shows, archive shows, upcoming show schedule. All that stuff can be found on Facebook. And if you guys would like to join the show live, you can go to extremehealthradio.com/live on Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific. And you can join the show live that way and enter the chat room and get your questions asked and answered, hopefully. So the live show is a great feature, and it's free for all of you guys. So just want to let you guys know about that. And as I said, this is episode 263 with Daniel Vitalis. He's been on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is his 8th time. Awesome stuff. And he's just a great guy doing some great work. He's a leading health motivator. For those that don't know, he's a nutritionist, an herbalist, educator, and creator of DanielVitalis.com and Surthrival.com. And he teaches people around the world how to apply nature-based solutions for primitive times in our modern lives. Sounds like a cool thing to me. So we've had him on a lot, and he's just a great guy. So I want to thank you, Daniel, for being on the show today.
Yeah, I think I'm on one episode for every 32.875 shows you do, man. Thanks for that.
I love that. You just figured that out in your head?
No, I just did not figure that out in my head.
It was the Bulletproof Coffee that told you that.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. Thanks for having me back on the show, man. It's always really fun to get on here. I love the rapport working with you guys, so thanks so much.
Yeah, you're so welcome. I was just on your Facebook feed a few days ago, and looks like you have your new dispatch for the Primal Movement coming out. Let's see, when is it? This June 22nd?
Well, yeah, that'll be, I think it's actually June 21st this year, summer solstice. And so, nice. You know, as I think you know, my magazine comes out, my free magazine comes out on all of the significant solar holidays. And so the next one upcoming is the summer solstice. I'm really excited about that, man. That one's on Primal Movement. And, you know, most of the work that I teach, you know, is more on nutrition and cleansing kind of stuff. But I have such a background in movement and exercise, and it's something I really love. And so I'm really glad to get to write about that, but also to interview some of the big names on that subject. So, yeah, I've got something really good in store for people.
So Primal Movement, it looks like, do you do a lot of work with those? What are those big, long bands that attach to trees? What are those called?
Those big, long bands that attach to trees. Yeah. I have no idea what you're talking about.
You know, it's like a balance thing that you...
with the slack line.
Slack line, yeah.
I have an obstacle course in my backyard that I've been building for about 3 years. It's sort of a hobby of mine. And, you know, there's good evidence that shows that the brains of vertebrates developed not for, you know, thinking, but for sophistication of movement. And I really don't love the idea of becoming a movement specialist. So as great as as impressive as it is, what some people are able to do with specificity, let's say like a baseball player, it's like very impressive. But It's a very specific physical skill. You spend your whole life training for this one thing. Pulled out of that, now you don't have cross fitness for other things, right? So I like movement. I want to be a movement generalist. So the obstacle course gives me the opportunity to train my body in infinitely new ways all the time, constantly teaching my physiology and my anatomy new specific skills. And the slackline is just one of those skills that I really like. And most of us have, walked a balance beam before, or have walked across even a curb or a railroad track or some kind of solid balance beam. The slack line is like that, except it's flexible. So it's a flattened rope. And that's called funambulation, walking on a rope. That's a completely different skill set. It's balancing, but on something that's moving and wiggling under you. So that's just another powerful way to teach your body to adapt to new circumstances, because the world outside, our actual habitat, it's unpredictable. It's not like our houses where everything's predictable. So I think it's really good to train your body for unpredictable new contingencies so that you're able to. And that'd be my pup.
Yeah, talk about unpredictable, right?
What's that?
I said talk about unpredictable, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Living with a Canis lupus familiaris.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, so Primal Movement Dispatch 3 comes out June 21st, and people can sign up for free. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So it's a free magazine. So the way I've set up all of my social media is, and my magazine is to be a natural calendar. So one of the things, that's that I've witnessed over the years of my own life is how living in the civilized world, civility comes from the word city or city-state. Living in that world pulls us out of natural time, and it puts us into something called civil time. So that time we keep on our watches, that time we keep on our clocks, valuable to us because it allows us all to sync up at the same time. But it's not natural time. Natural time is based on the sun, earth, moon relationships. So I put out all my newsletters on the new and the full moon, so that helps people stay attuned to the month or the moon calendar. And then I set up the magazine to come out, like I said, with the solstices, the equinoxes, and the cross quarters. So this next one comes out summer solstice, and they'll just keep rolling. Free magazine coming out every time there's a solar holiday for the rest of the year. That's awesome. And people can read that probably on their iPad and things like that too, right? Yeah, exactly. And it's, I just got to say that it's the writing there I'm really proud of. I think that both the writing that I do for it, but also the amazing contributors I have. So my partner, my primary pair bond, Allie, she writes a column there, Wild Woman Speaks. My good friend Frank Giglio writes Rewild Your Diet. Mm-hmm. My friend Arthur Haynes is prolific in there. So, and then we also have people from the Rewild Yourself community, from the tribe, contributing as well. And we're just very particular about the writing. We don't allow anything in there that's sort of trite or shallow. It's deep writing. It's piercing. It's penetrating. And just, I think with the internet becoming so saturated in low quality blogging, commercial blogging, we wanted to make sure that we were putting stuff out there that really cut to the heart of what people are interested in the rewilding community. So, yeah, I think that people will be really impressed. I think every issue that comes out is basically like an ebook, but it's multimedia. That's so cool. And so recently you've been doing some work. I've been following your stuff on Facebook, and I see your posts, and I'm just glad I see your posts with Facebook these days. You don't know whose posts you're going to see, but I've been following your stuff, and you've been posting some, provocative pictures here and there, which are pretty cool about, a lot about sexuality, which is what we're going to talk about today. And so what got you into that recently, and more studying and things like that? Oh, I'd say having a penis, and testicles. No, it's funny, right? Like, what gets us into, I've been into sex since before puberty, right? Right. I think most of us have been into sex for a long time. Most of us, and here's the thing, we're going to be talking about sex, so it's like, here it is, sex, right?
Yeah, just put it out there.
Yeah, people have a really difficult time talking about it.
Right.
Most of us are pretty embarrassed to talk about sex, and most of us would really underrate or undervalue sex in our lives if we're asked about it, because it's so taboo. Mm. It's weird. It's a weird thing. In some ways, it's not taboo at all, right? As long as we're not going deep into the subject. as long as we're not talking about what we actually do, then sex isn't taboo, right? It's everywhere. It's around us. It's constantly in our faces.
Right.
But to actually have a real conversation, a vulnerable conversation about sex, an intimate conversation about it, even between partners, right? I've been in plenty of relationships over my life. You know, we are a serially monogamous species. So I've been in plenty of relationships, and I can attest in my own life that it's been very, very difficult to talk about sex openly, even within the context of an intimate relationship between two people who are sexual with each other. So having a public conversation about it can be challenging.
Yeah.
And I think for me, what happened was I got into, I've been in a relationship with my partner for about 4 years now, or maybe a little longer. And don't tell her I said maybe a little longer. That doesn't sound. We reached the limitations of the standard relationship style that's prescribed by our culture. It just sort of like felt like the boundaries of it were too constrictive and too tight. And that, when I feel something like that, when I run up against when I feel the pressure to conform, I just know something's wrong. And I started to dig a little bit deeper than I had over the years, but it's very easy in our culture to become complacent with things. And so I dug a little bit deeper, and I started to uncover some of the sort of hidden truths about Homo sapiens, the animal. I applied the same logic that I apply to nutrition, right? So I've been on the show now several times, and every time we've talked about nutrition, or we've talked about breathing, or we've talked about sunlight, or any of these things, the way that I think is I go, hey, what happened? What were we doing before we became civilized 6,000, 10,000 years ago, before we started building city-states, and we were living as another one of the wild animals on this planet, a sophisticated wild animal, a wild animal that built tools and even built clothing. I mean, we were making fire. We were very sophisticated, but we still were living in wild environments and living off wild food. What did we do then? That can inform us about what we might want to incorporate today, because what happens is if we try to deny aspects of our nature, we develop psychological and physiological diseases, right? I mean, this is just so obvious. And in fact, not only is it really obvious to anybody who thinks about it, this will be fundamental to the sciences of the future. Science is about to get this, because there's tons and tons and tons of studies done on every aspect of our lives. And every time we look at hunter-gatherer people compared to people today, we see, the way they were doing it worked because we were biologically adapted to it. So if we're going to talk about sexuality, right, it doesn't make sense for us to sort of do the Kinsey kind of thing. Hey, what do people in civilization do sexually? It kind of makes sense to say, hey, what did human beings do sexually before civilization, which is a very new thing. It represents 5% of our time in our bodies as anatomically modern humans. It doesn't make sense to ask ourselves what we do now, because we're all a little bit tweaked from living in civilization.
Yeah.
So the starting point, it makes sense to say, hey, what's natural human sexuality all about? What is sex for? What is sex for? Why do we do it? I mean, I think that's a question we don't even really ask ourselves. And what's happening right now is we're bumbling our way through sex, right? Most people, if they're out of the context of relationships, it's funny, right? How do most people end up having sex? They sort of bumble into it.
Yeah.
Right? It's sort of like, it's not a real conscious thing very often, is it? It's not like two people sit down and sort of contractually decide they're going to do it. They sort of bumble and bump and grind their way into it, often with like alcohol in order to sort of facilitate that and it's not something we're doing very consciously. And one of the challenges about being conscious about our sexuality is that there's so much taboo, and taboos function below the level of consciousness. That's, I think, what's really important to understand about. We throw this word conscious around, right? You hear it all the time now.
Yeah, we hear it everywhere.
Everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And an average person, if you ask what they mean by that, because what they don't mean is awake, in the sense of like, okay, when I'm asleep, I'm unconscious. When I'm awake, I'm conscious. That's not what people mean, right? People more mean that there's some level of introspection going on about the topic. So if we say conscious nutrition, what we don't mean is that what you eat while you're awake. Right. That's not what people mean. They mean that they're actually paying attention, that they're being mindful about nutrition. So conscious sexuality, then, we need to be mindful about it. But the challenge is we're not mindful of taboos. We're not aware that taboos are functioning there very often. So taboos, we almost just assume they're universal truths because they've been so pervasive in our own culture. So, I like to use the example of eating cats and dogs. I think it's a great example of a taboo. I mean, it's a wonderful example. Most of us in this culture just assume that there's something about dogs. You just don't eat dogs and cats, right? Why? Some parts of the world they do, but for here it's a taboo, so we don't ever really question it. We don't have talks about, we don't see people protesting in the street like, people should be able to eat dogs and cats. Like, people don't, it doesn't get thought about.
No.
It doesn't get talked about because it's a taboo. We just accept it as a universal truth. Well, around sex, we have so many taboos that, I think it's a joke for people to talk about being conscious with their sexuality until they really start to confront the taboos around sex.
So, so do the taboos sort of arise out of the more and more disconnected we get in our society, the more and more fake we get in our reality, the more and more disconnected we get from nature? Do more taboos, do you think, arise because of that?
Well, in order to have a civilization, this is difficult to even talk about because the idea of no civilization is taboo. Right. Now, so a civilization is a society that builds city-states. If I was to say we were better off without civilization, that alone is taboo because there's this idea that not only is civilization important, that it represents the peak of our evolution, that it's the most important thing we ever created, and that if we have to destroy every organism on the planet and push the entire ecology to extinction in order to preserve civilization, we will have to do it. Right? That's the overarching message theme that we get from our civilization. It's like, it's the most important thing. You can be sacrificed. Civilization must go on.
Right.
Well, I really do not believe that. I mean, my experiences and the research that I've done illustrates that human beings living in civilization are the sickest, the most deformed, the most degenerated, the most suicidal, the most homicidal, the most unhappy, the most unfulfilled. And when we look at civilized societies that are not civilized, in other words, wild peoples, these could be still living hunter-gatherers today. These could be the hunting and gathering societies that were here on this continent before the conquest. When we look at those people, we find them to be much happier, much more fulfilled, much healthier, more robust, and more fit for their environment. So civilization, by its very nature, intrinsically has taboos against anything that implies wildness. Sex is one of those places because civilization gets by kind of convincing us that we aren't like other animals. Because civilization, city building, is not natural for humans. So in order to do it, we have to convince ourselves there's something about us that means that gives us the permission and right to transcend nature at the expense of other organisms, if that makes sense. So civilization wants to repress anything that reminds us that we're an animal. And one of the biggest things that reminds us that we're an animal is sex.
And do you think they do that because there's probably a couple of reasons that come to mind? Perhaps maybe it's because in order to keep kicking the can down the road and keep society going, you have to remind people that they're not animals. And perhaps maybe there's a religious thing there too, because they don't like to admit that either. So there's
a huge religious component. And I want to be careful about saying they, because I'm not trying to imply some kind of central intelligent conspiracy. I think it's civilization itself. How do you say this? It's intrinsic to civilization itself. It doesn't matter who's in control. Civilization will attempt to repress wildness because if we express wildness, we'll leave civilization behind.
Yeah.
That's, I think, what's most important to understand is that human beings don't like being pressed and forced into this economic model that we're in, right? Most of us feel like it sucks. We don't like it. We don't like being forced onto a workforce. We don't like compulsory schooling. Mm-hmm. We don't like feeling like our behavior is restricted. But if we're allowed to express wildness, what would we do? We would just sort of walk away from this way of living.
Right.
And so we have to be forced into it. Now, Again, part of what civilization wants us to believe is that we're some kind of angelic creature, different from all the other species. And therefore, that sort of base carnal sex, that like doggy style human sex, right? That kind of thing is like, whoa, that looks like what animals do. And so we dress it up, we shave ourselves down, we put on a bunch of clothes, we put on perfumes, and we put on makeup, and we put on deodorants, and we wear shoes, and we wear neckties, and we cut our hair, and we do all these things to make ourselves look like something other than animals. And then we tuck the sex piece behind closed doors and don't really allow it to be seen, well, only as a controlled substance. We don't let it be seen because if it's seen, it reminds us what? That we are like all the other mammals, that we're just mammals.
Right. Yeah. And if we, in the longer that we, know that, I mean, it's interesting how it's just so, it's so disconnected with how we are. And I understand on one level because, I mean, like you said, it's not necessarily bad. It's just that in order for society to keep going, that's just part of the way it works,
Yeah, so taboos are intrinsic to our culture, and every society has taboos. I mean, it's not like hunter-gatherer peoples don't have taboos. Every culture has its taboos, things that are acceptable and things that aren't acceptable. Taboo is the opposite of consciousness in the way that we mean it, in the sort of the new agey way that we mean it, right? So when we say conscious now, most of us are talking about actually mindfully looking at and observing something. Taboo is the opposite. It's when we refuse to look at a thing because we have already determined it, or it's already been determined for us that the thing is bad. So we've applied that to sex, right? Sex is very confusing for us because, one, it's probably after our base survival needs. What are people really after? Right. After our base survival needs, sex is like the prime motivator. In fact, when we look at, in Darwinian evolutionary sciences, like the idea of fitness is an organism's ability to survive and reproduce in its environment. So in other words, it's survival and then it's reproduction. So first and foremost is make sure you have enough food, water, air, light to survive. After that, the next thing is reproduce, is sex. So sex is the prime driver after survival, yet we push it back and we act as if it's a more minor thing than it actually is. But of course, advertisers know how important it is and that's why it's being used nonstop, constantly. We're always being stimulated and sexualized by media because it helps to motivate us, and then they can use that to motivate us to buy products or buy services.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We're going to take a little break now, but this is just so good. And we have so many questions here in the chat room that I want to get to a couple of them because they're really good. We're with Daniel Vitalis, and we're talking about sacred sexuality. Fascinating subject, fascinating guy. And Kate is back in the studio.
Hello, Daniel Vitalis.
Oh, well, now I got you both.
I wouldn't miss it for the world, but I'm back and I'm ready to roll after the commercial.
Awesome. So, yeah, this is awesome stuff. DanielVitalis.com if you want to check out more of his blog. And also his products are available at SirThrival.com too. You can check those out. So I want to encourage you guys to look at that. He's got a lot of good stuff there too. So we'll be right back with Daniel Vitalis right after this break. So a few years ago when I was working for this company, it was a really small company, and I had been wanting a Vitamix blender for years and years and years, but they're so expensive and I just hadn't saved the money at that time to get one. And so as a Christmas bonus, they knew that I loved the Vitamix, so they got me a Vitamix, the 5000 blender. And that thing is so incredible. It was right at the beginning of my raw food journey, and I was using it about 3 times a day, really. Today, I still use it about twice a day to make blended smoothies and things like that. But the Vitamix blender is really, really great. And if you go to extremehealthradio.com/Vitamix, that will redirect you over to there, and then you'll be able to purchase that, and we'll get a commission for your order. And you'll also get free shipping, too, so that'll be great for you if you're interested in saving about $25 on the shipping. And with the Vitamix, you can make sauces and dips and bread. You could make ice cream with it. I've done a lot of ice cream. You can just make the most incredible things. And it's my favorite because it's got a tamper on it. And you can put ice and frozen berries and avocado and some honey and things like that, and with no water at all. And you have that tamper, and you can make the most amazing ice creams with it. So The Vitamix is my favorite blender of choice, and if you're in the market to buy one, I would greatly encourage you to do so if you have the money for it. And if you do it through us, through extremehealthradio.com/Vitamix, I'll get a little commission for it, and you'll get free shipping. So it works out for you and for us too. So if you're in the market, please do it through us. That'd be really cool. And you're going to love this thing when you get it. You're going to fall in love with it. You'll never go back to a regular blender again. So check that out, extremehealthradio.com/Vitamix, and I hope you enjoy it. Sometimes busy lifestyles and easy access to processed foods prevent us from getting all the nutrition we need to maintain our well-being. If you are in need of an energy and immune system boost, you have to try Hawaiian Spirulina. Hawaiian Spirulina is a caffeine-free way to boost your energy levels without the later energy crash. Pure Hawaiian Spirulina Pacifica is an easy way to support your health and is the most nutritious whole food supplement known to mankind. Cultivated on the pristine Kona coast in Hawaii, this superfood is packed with over 100 nutrients in each serving to support your natural energy levels and boost your immunity. Try Hawaiian Spirulina today and feel the difference. Save 25% off your Spirulina order today by using the coupon code JUSTIN at extremehealthradio.com/Nutrex, Nutrex. That's extremehealthradio.com/Nutrex.
100% listener supported. Extreme Health Radio. Opening minds and transforming lives worldwide. Don't forget to join our thriving community for health tips, inspiration, and show updates at extremehealthradio.com/Facebook.
So, Kate, it's good to have you back.
Thanks. It's good to be back. Better than running around in the rat race out there, right?
Yeah, it's good to have you back in the studio.
Thank you.
Yeah, I feel like the song here should be, what's that song that was in the 90s? Let's Talk About Sex. Remember that?
I know, right? You should have mixed it up for the show.
I should have had that on there.
Am I coming in just at the time it's getting juicy, I hope?
Yeah, it's good. Oh. Look at you.
I don't want to miss anything.
I thought you were going to make another joke.
No.
Getting juicy. Now, this is awesome stuff, and we're going to get into some listener questions perhaps in the chat room, too. We've got lots of stuff going on here with Daniel Vitalis from danielvitalis.com and sirthrival.com. You want to check those out. He's got lots of good stuff on that website. So Daniel Vitalis is more like his blog and his writings. You can sign up for his magazine there. And then on Sir Thrival, he's got a lot of his products, like his physical products, his supplements and things like that, which I highly recommend you check out. I mean, it's just going to really, really enhance your life. So I'd check that out. And so we broadcast 4 days a week on Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific. So I want to let you guys know about that. We're live 4 days a week, so you can join the chat room and join the community that way. So it's a great way to interact with us and get your questions answered, hopefully. So Daniel, we have a bunch of questions in the listener chat room. Do you want to take a couple of those for a moment?
I'm happy to, as long as they don't take us too far into the advanced area of the material, because I want to make sure we, this kind of conversation can trigger a lot of people, and I want to make sure we're careful to ease. Let's ease our way in. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, let's just keep going.
You gotta lick it before you kick it.
There, there you go.
Well put.
I love that. So before the break, we were just talking about just the taboo of it all and things like that. And so it's just interesting because you mentioned about the whole idea of how they market sex and stuff like that. And it's really interesting to me how it's just been so intrinsically woven, tightly woven into everything we do, and everything from commercials to everywhere. It seems to just throw this sexual spin on things. And so sort of removing yourself from that is a good place to start to sort of get your own thoughts, right? Start thinking about sex maybe in a different way.
Or like seeing how much you actually think about sex. I mean, because sex, you feel what it's like when sexual energy starts to move in your body, right? And you also, I mean, I'm sure you guys have all noticed this. Everybody listening has noticed this. When your sexual energy really starts to move, you enter an altered state of consciousness. That is not your normal waking state. And decisions you make, things you'll say and do are very different than what you do in your normal waking state. It's an altered state of consciousness. Think about the last time you were having great sex and the things that you said. And they're almost embarrassing, right? Like if you were to just say them normally to your lover, like just date on the day to day, it would sound ridiculous, right? Mm-hmm. And then you see pornography and you're like, oh, I kind of say stuff like that. Like it's weird what overtakes you and what comes out, right?
Right.
So the reason I'm saying this is because if you're being sexually stimulated by media, then it's putting you into an altered state. Subtly, but it's an altered state. And you become more suggestive. Uh-huh. Think about things that you think you would never do sexually, and then all of a sudden you find yourself doing them. Mm. You're like, you told yourself you wouldn't do that, you're doing it. And because you become more suggestible. So it's important to know that media is trying to put you in a sexually suggestive state because you're easier to market to then. You're easier to lead around. Right? That's what's going on.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's good to pull yourself out of that so you can just get your brain back.
Right. Yeah, it's wild because if we don't really stay up to date and stay aware of that stuff, you start getting really manipulated and easily moldable, and you don't even know it. It's like almost it's like it becomes a part of your subconscious. It's like you start thinking how you see on TV and how you see in movies,
Yeah, and of course, if you can connect a product to the idea of more liberal sex. See, here's one of the things, and we'll get to this more as we move on, but human beings naturally have much more liberal sexuality. Far more, and I don't mean liberal left wing, I mean liberal like our sex is less restricted in nature. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things is that human beings feel really pent up about sex. And so if you can take a product and associate it to liberal sex, and convince people that product equals more liberal sex, people will want that product because what they really want is more liberal sex. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, why take beer and associate it with piles of bikini-clad girls at a pool, right? Mm-hmm. Like, the reality is beer actually diminishes your sex drive. Beer diminishes your ability to maintain an erection. Beer diminishes your ability to maintain a masculine body.
Well, it almost feminizes you, right?
What's that?
It pretty much feminizes you, right? If you're
it does. It feminizes a guy, and of course, like getting drunk can loosen up our restraint about sex. But beer hardly equals sex. Yet we've been marketed that so much that we've come to associate the two together. So we see that with everything from jeans to cars to fast food gets marketed to us with sex. Because if we can get into that sexualized place, we're more suggestive. And if we think that product, even though the conscious belief would be ridiculous, if at the subconscious level we think it could equal more liberal sex, most of us will bite at that.
So fascinating. Yeah, it's just so weird how that's so, in our culture and just woven throughout. We had a listener, you just mentioned something about pornography. We had a listener in the chat room talk about, what are your thoughts about that?
Wow, I think the current state of pornography sucks. I mean, can it get better? Right? Here's what I think. First, I don't think we need to be. I don't want to take that position of, oh, it's just bad, we just need to get rid of it. I mean, I just think this attitude never works. Right? That attitude didn't work in the prohibition, hasn't worked in the drug war. You're not going to get rid of pornography. The idea that the idea of prostitution as sex work as the oldest profession, you hear that sometimes said, oh, that's the oldest profession in the world.
Right.
That's not made up. That is the oldest profession in the world. And there's evidence for that. And we can talk about that later. But this sex work is not going away. What's really interesting to me about pornography is that most people consume it. I sometimes consume it. Yet we tend to deny it because it's taboo. And then we think very, very ill of the people who star in those films.
Right.
And yet we consume their product. So it's very taboo for somebody to be in it, right? Like there's a documentary that came out recently, I believe it's called After Porn. And it was following all these 80s, 90s porn stars now where they are in their life, and really a sad state because these people are having a difficult time establishing their lives anywhere they go. And what really emerges out of that is the people who are treating them, who won't let them integrate into their neighborhoods, towns, and societies, won't because they're familiar with these people. They're familiar with these people because they watched their product.
Wow.
And now they ostracize those people because they don't want to be reminded that they partook in a taboo. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a weird situation.
It almost, puts more guilt on them, you know?
Yeah. I don't want to, I did something that's taboo. I don't want to look at it, so I don't want to see the person that was in that taboo because that will remind me of what I did.
Yeah,
Interesting.
It's just this whole convoluted thing, yeah.
Very confusing, right?
Yeah.
I think pornography becomes an outlet for us in a lot of ways because we see liberal sexuality taking place, and most of us don't have that in our lives, and so it's a kind of release. Regardless, what we see is that human beings consume it, and they consume a lot of it. On the negative side, I think there's a few things that are. One is that it's very confusing because the pornography is made from the male perspective almost exclusively. Pornography is usually timed around the frequency of male stroking and masturbation. So when people see pornography, that's not what sex is really like, right? Most of us know that.
Right.
But in the same way, we get very confused by media. We'll start to think things that we see in media are real, even at the expense of things that we see in our day to day. Let me try to think of an example. It's like movie violence is a good example. Movie violence looks nothing like real world violence. So if you've ever seen a real fight, let's say you see two guys and they actually get in an actual fight. Usually what happens is there's a bit of a monkey dance. They rush in together. They swing punches that are actually subconsciously designed not to injure. This is a lot like what deer do. They're not trying to kill each other with their antlers. They're sparring. It's designed not to hurt. Usually they fall down on the ground and the thing is separated in typically 10 to 30 seconds. That's a real fight. Fights in movies, both people know all this martial arts, right? They take these stances, they fight for a minute, and then they stop and they talk like, you killed my father, now I must kill you. Then they fight again. But that's not anything like real life, but we'll start to think that that's more real than what we actually know to be real with our own eyes in real life. Similarly, with sex, if people watch a lot of pornography, they'll start to expect that that's what sex is going to be like, but sex isn't like that.
Right.
That's sex from the male fantasy perspective, and it's timed around how men masturbate. And it certainly does not really show what's real with women. I mean, I think that's one of the most awkward things as a male. Yeah. I grew up first with pornography before I had access to actual sex.
Right.
So I had no idea what to expect from real world women.
Yeah, what's weird about the whole pornography thing? It's funny how, with animals, like two animals will be having sex and there'll be another animal sitting right there and they don't care. They don't want to watch. It doesn't stimulate them in any way. But they don't hide it. They don't hide it. Yeah. So think about in your day to day. Now, I mean, I've talked at length about this, but if you guys were to right now get naked and walk out of your studio and start walking around town, I bet you'd make it an hour or two max, and then you'd get arrested. Right? You'd be brought to the police station. You'd be booked. You'd be fingerprinted. You're in California, right? So you'd probably be charged with a sex crime. And then you would then be on the federal sex offender list. And then for the rest of your lives, anywhere you moved, your neighborhood would be blanketed with leaflets and pamphlets talking about how a sex offender just moved into town. Right.
That's a pretty extreme given that that's your natural body, right? That seems like a pretty repressive taboo given that we're all naked under our clothes, right? Sometimes I walk around and I think, everybody's naked under their clothes.
Yeah, I know, right? It's all there.
Right? But we hide it so much. So pornography is a place where we can see naked people. Sex is hidden from our eyes. So the only sex that most of us get to see is the sex that we're involved in. And of course, there are always exceptions. But most of us really only see the sex we're involved in. So there's a natural curiosity to see other sex, right? To see other naked people. Now think about this, guys. You are literally kept from, and I don't think it's a central they, but it's sort of how civilization works. You're kept from seeing people born, people making more babies, people having babies, and people dying. Those four are the four most important key phases of human existence. You're not allowed to see any of them unless you're there doing it. Right?
Isn't that wild? Yeah.
So if you have a baby, okay, you can be there to see that baby born. But we don't see a lot of other babies being born.
Right.
We don't get to see naked people. We don't get to see sex. right? We don't get to see other people's babies being born. And then when people die, we shuttle that away to some other place too. So all this stuff is really deeply repressed. So there's a pretty heavy natural curiosity about it as well. You're not even allowed to be seen naked by somebody else. But if we were to remove all that, do you think like in a hunter-gatherer society, because the women are let's say they're breaking seeds down in a mortar and pestle, do you think there's guys jerking off in the woods watching them? No, of course not. They see these naked women all the time. I get to, I hang out at a couple places around the country that are nudity friendly. So different hot springs that I go to. And the first time you go, you're so nervous, right? Like, oh my God, people are going to see me naked. It's really hard at first.
Right.
Eventually, what you realize is nobody's looking at you. Everybody's worried about their own body. That's the first thing I realized, that nobody's like analyzing my body or judging me. They're all just dealing with their own internal process. And then eventually the whole thing just fades away, and eventually it's just nothing. You don't care. It's not provocative.
Right.
Becomes normalized. So I think a big part of the taboo about, oh my God, pornography is because really people are hung up about naked people and sex. If you had no charge about sex being good or bad, you just understood sex was, there was an incredible, pleasurable way that we reproduce ourselves and socialize, and you didn't have any issues about nudity, then probably you wouldn't have issues about pornography. It would just be this neutral, like whatever. But I think there are some negatives, and that is that it does miseducate people, particularly boys, because I think boys consume more of it. It miseducates boys about women, about women's bodies, and about women's sexual response, because women in pornography seem to be orgasming all the time, no matter what you do, no matter how rough you are with them, no matter how unaware you are of how their sexual anatomy works. It just seems like they're always just orgasming and screaming with pleasure. Right. That's obviously not reality, right? So those kind of things I think can be a bit damaging. And I think the current state of pornography is, it's unfortunate to see the way women are treated, because I think that, I think what would be nice is some higher end tantric pornography. But until that day comes, I think it'd be silly for us to try to tell people they shouldn't watch it. The reality is people are going to continue to.
Do you think people in wild cultures, when you see the women in Africa, doing what you're just talking about, describing, with the mortar and pestle and things like that, and the men are there and everyone's around and everyone's basically naked. Is there something there where it, cause in our culture, we like to, leave a little bit to the imagination. We like to see, a little bit people covered up, but then just a little bit revealing. In that culture, is it more difficult for them to get aroused because they see something so often every single day like that?
Oh, interesting.
That's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer for that. I don't know. I've not come across that in any of the research. I doubt that they're having a difficult time getting aroused, but I think that they're probably not. I think we have that flipped around. I think the problem is we're constantly aroused. I mean, picture how our society works. You are sexually repressed and forced to hide it, and then it's shown to you literally all day long. Think about the cognitive dissonance there, right? So you have sexual repression mixed with exploitive sexual advertising, so that you are at the same time that you're repressing, you're also stimulated.
Yeah.
What's that? That leads to a weird. That's what's not normal. So it wouldn't be fair to say that people in a tribal environment had difficulty getting aroused. They would get aroused in a way that's natural. Does that make sense?
Yeah, a little bit different and more natural.
We have it flipped around. I mean, because the question is almost coming from the perspective of that we are normal, and the way we get aroused is normal, but the way that we get aroused is actually a little bit maladaptive.
Yeah.
And I think we need to, there's a couple other pieces here I think are really important that we explore before we even get into the piece about what natural human sexuality is like. That's that we're barely fit to have the conversation, right? In our culture, it was 1920 that women were considered to, or allowed to vote. 1920. I mean, this is not that long ago, right?
Yeah.
This is fairly recently. This is like your grandmother's mother was alive for that, right? This is this is still deep in our cultural memory. Women are not even equal with men enough to have a say in how their society is run, right? It's not that long ago that we had African children in zoos in New York City. Okay, I mean we are just getting to this idea of equality, and we haven't figured it out yet.
Right.
The next piece is we just stopped circumcising women in the United States in the 1970s.
Whoa.
Yeah, stop circumcising women.
In the 70s.
In the 70s. I saw you posted something about Facebook on that, on Facebook.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that.
So it wasn't banned in the U.S. until 1996.
Oh my gosh.
Blue Cross paid for it in 1977. In other words, in 1977, you could have caught your daughter masturbating, brought her in to the doctor, and they would recommend the option of circumcising your daughter. They would actually either remove her clitoris completely, or the external clitoral glands, so what we call the clit, but it's not actually a much larger organ. But they would remove the superficial part of the clitoris. They would trim off the labia. They would remove the clitoral head. There were clitoral hood. There were several surgeries that they would do. This was to desensitize. And really, if we look back a little bit further, we see it was to punish self-touching, self-gratification, sexualization. So this is not that long ago. I was born in 1978. Blue Cross paid for this until 1977. So the year before I was born, girls were being, it was covered by insurance. That's really shocking, right? And it's hard to hear, but we're still doing it to boys today. Every 3 seconds.
Is that really?
A boy's having, right now, as we're speaking, boys are having 1/2 of the skin of their penis cut off at birth. And the effects of this are more and more are becoming established, right? There's research now showing that this creates a lot of emotional trauma. Because the way this is done is usually it's done, within the first couple days of birth. The boy is taken away from his mother. That's the initial trauma. At that stage, you shouldn't be taken away from your mother. You need skin-to-skin contact with your mother. The boy's removed, he's brought into another room. He's tied down his feet and hands, so the only thing the baby can then move is his head from side to side. He's stripped down. They rub iodine all over his penis. They basically insert this weird plastic thing under the foreskin. Now, at this point, the foreskin should not be removed from the head of the penis. It's tightly bound there. So just the act of putting a pair of forceps in and prying the foreskin apart so it can be pulled back over the head is incredibly painful. And the baby is screaming, and you can watch this on the internet. The sound is,
horrifying.
Deep in your genetic memory that this sound is a baby in trauma, right? It's a horrible sound. Then they surgically grind off. They don't just slice away the foreskin, they crush it to remove it. This is half of the skin of the penis. Now, it's not just some useless skin either. It produces smegma, which is the sebum that lubricates the head of the penis. It protects the glands of the penis. It has pheromone glands in it that secrete pheromones that help you attract ideal reproductive mates. All that's cut away. That's half the skin of the penis. And then that is sold off to become cosmetics. The baby's returned to his mother and highly traumatized. So it's a way of telling boys very, very early in life that 1, your penis is connected to pain and trauma. 2, your mom can't protect you. 3, you're not sexually in control. Other people are. It's a sexual abuse, and it's still going on today. It's legal in the United States. And it's happening every single day, all day long. My generation, it was my generation was 90% of boys.
Whoa.
Isn't that
90%.
Wow.
That means that we essentially have a generation right now, alive right now, who are making decisions about this civilization we live in. Almost all of them have been sexually brutalized as children.
That's amazing too, because with the circumcision, isn't there some connection to the brain too? Isn't there something that goes on between that area of the body and the brain where it causes arousal or it switches something on or off or something like that?
Well, it certainly connects the trauma to the penis, right? It connects the trauma to the penis. So for those of us who are circumcised, and I'm one of them, the rest of our lives, first of all, what we think of as a normal looking penis is a penis with a tremendous scar on it. Right? We think that like two-tone look of the end of the penis is normal, but that's a scar.
Wow.
Right? That's a scar. That's a rather large, significant scar. So you're walking around with a scar on your penis, right? Another piece about this is that once that's happened, those of us who've been circumcised will never experience natural sex. There's a component that's missing because you think about how good, guys, think about how good it feels when you're having sex, right? The movement of your penis inside and outside of the vagina is, let's face it, it's one of the best feelings that exists. But there's another feeling that's supposed to be there. That's the foreskin slipping over and back and forth over the head while you're doing that.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So there's a second stimulation that's supposed to be taking place. Well, many of us will never know what that's like. The next piece is that the glands, which is the anatomical equivalent to the clitoris, should be hyper sensitive, but it becomes calloused when you've been circumcised, because your whole life, the glands of the penis is now abrading itself against your clothing, which means that the sensitivity is lost. So that's one of the reasons, ladies, if you've ever wondered why guys have to just pound and pound and pound when they're having sex, it's because they are having sex with a penis that's been that has a large callus on it.
Interesting.
And so their sensitivity is less, and so they need more friction and more intensity in order to feel the amount of stimulation that they're after. So I guess my point is, you see how it's very difficult for us to even have a conversation about what natural sex is, because we're still mutilating the sex organs of our children.
Right. Yeah, it's happening all the time.
Are people waking up to this fact of medical mutilation? I mean, are people's eyes opening? Is the circumcision with young boys dropping in the rates of
it is quite a bit, but it's dropping regionally. So I think we're down to 60% now. So like I said, in the late 1970s, it was 90%. Today it's 60% of boys, but the greater preponderance of that is on the East Coast. And on the West Coast, we see it's much, much less. So the West Coast, which is, I think it's easy for us to say, a much more progressively minded place, people are realizing that it's unnecessary. And on the East Coast, where people, where tradition is a little bit more entrenched, it's going on more frequently. So, but it is dropping. And of course, I mean, it doesn't take a brainiac to figure out that in the not too distant future, it will be illegal.
Do you think
it's not going to be one of these? It's not going to be one of these things where it just tapers down to zero. It's just going to become illegal. The fact that we have people who circumcise their boys out in the streets protesting against female circumcision, I think, is a little bit strange.
It's kind of weird, isn't it? What do you think about any of the regrow options? I know people have talked about that. I was going to ask you that a little bit earlier about the regrowing the foreskin. Do you see any merit to that? Do you see that working at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's And so if you're listening and you're wondering what he's talking about, your body is so adaptive, and there's a technique of basically creating pull on the existing foreskin, and over the course of a couple of years, growing foreskin long enough to cover the glands. It's very complicated. It's a considerable effort required to make this happen. It will not ever be the same in that it won't produce the same the smegma, the lubricant. It won't have the pheromone glands, and it won't bind around the glands the same way that the original foreskin would have, but it does at least protect the glands of the penis from that abrasion. So this is something I don't have experience with, but I know that there is a big movement of men who have done that. Foreskin restoration, they call it. Right. And they call themselves restored males. And I think there is merit there, though I think it would be nice to see a more streamlined technique available. And, and ultimately, I think this is important stuff, but really, I think, first and foremost, we got to just stop doing this to boys. I mean, because here's the thing, guys, a lot of what we associate as hyper, we think of like too much testosterone, too male, too masculine, all that kind of stuff. A lot of that is just the trauma of, that's not natural to men. That's men who've been traumatized.
Right.
There is, you talked about, like, is there some connection with the brain? Well, there's some preliminary research of this thing they call alexithymia, which is, basically what it is an inability to connect with yourself emotionally. So there's evidence linking circumcision to males feeling like emotionally robotic, like they can't connect to their feelings. And that's because they had such a strong, dramatic trauma there. It's a post-traumatic stress. So, I mean,
exactly.
I think that a lot of what we think of as like the negative aspects of masculinity are actually the negative aspects of masculinity when masculinity has been traumatized. And we can find lots of negatives with females when they've been traumatized too. And so for us to have a normal conversation about sex, we got to face down some of this stuff, our own trauma and cultural trauma, this baggage that we've carried with us, because it really impacts our ability to see clearly. That makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. We're with Daniel Vitalis, danielvitalis.com and SirThrival.com as well. Make sure to check out his site, connect up with him on Facebook, check out his products on SirThrival. Good stuff. So we're having a great time here. This is episode 263. Yeah, 263. And we broadcast worldwide Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific. So you can always join the live chat room and get your questions answered. We're going to take a little break and we'll be right back. I have to say, I have been absolutely loving this product by Tristan Truscott and Peter Ragnar called Good Morning, Good Evening Qigong. If you want to listen to the interview we did with Tristan, you can go to extremehealthradio.com/127. And Qigong is a great way to de-stress the body. And as you know, there's a huge component to disease caused by stress. And stress is a huge factor in how we live our lives and the amount of energy we have and the amount of vitality we have. And so, Dr. Shade, what do you think about Qigong?
People come to me and they're really sick and they got this blown out neurological system and all this toxicity. And I tell them, you need to do Qigong, Tai Chi. You need to do these things that settle down and restore your neurology, because it puts together all the parts. It puts you back into that state where you can start to detoxify. And so I highly, highly recommend all that.
And what about you, Kit Campbell? What do you think about Qigong? Do you like it as well?
Qigong is amazing. And the reason that I believe it to be amazing is everything here is energy. That is a scientific fact, if there ever is one. So when you're practicing Qigong, you're actually drawing energy into your body. Your intention, whatever your intention is behind any action, will determine the level of energy, type of energy that you absorb into your body. So your intention behind is very important, just like thought. So when you're practicing Qigong, you're actually bringing energy in and you're bringing out the stuff that might be a bit stale. With Tai Chi, it's totally different. The energy runs underneath the skin because it's more of a martial. This is the Chinese understanding, by the way. It's more of a martial art. So Qigong is very, very good for bringing that energy into the body, and just fantastic.
If you're interested in picking up this Qigong course by Tristan Truscott and Peter Ragnar, go to extremehealthradio.com/Qigong. That's QIGONG. And you can learn more about it. There's a great video on that page, and you can learn more about it on that page. And I highly, highly recommend this product. I love it myself, so go ahead and check that out. extremehealthradio.com/Qigong.
All free shows, all the time, on Extreme Health Radio. Opening minds and transforming lives worldwide. Join our community today. Sign up to our email list and instantly get our free gift to you, along with loads of inspirational content and cutting-edge tips to help change your life at extremehealthradio.com/subscribe.
So I just want to let you guys know about our upcoming show schedule. Tomorrow we have our Free For All Friday show. If you guys want to check that out, where Kate and I discuss the previous week's guests and all kinds of stuff that's going on in our lives, and hopefully answer some of your health questions, or at least point you in the right direction. Then next Monday we have Dr. Kate Remu Blue. I'm not sure how to say her name.
Hopefully you can get it right by then, right?
Yeah, I'll get it right by then. She'll be talking about osteoporosis, heart disease, vitamin K2. And then we got Dr. John Apsley next week. We'll be doing part 1 of a 4-part series on the 4 pillars for healing cancer that he has come up with, Dr. John Apsley. And then we have Maria Valdivia. I think that's how you say her name.
I hope you get that one right,
I'll get that one. I'll work on that as well. Biomagnetic healing therapy. So that should be an interesting show. I have no idea what that is. So we'll learn more next Thursday. So we're having a great time here with Daniel Vitalis from danielvitalis.com. And during the break, Daniel, Kate, and I were talking a little bit about, what are some of the things, I know we want to move on from circumcision, but just wrapping that up a little bit, what are some things people can do? It seems like it would be a benefit for women to realize that the male anatomy shouldn't look a certain way, and it really is mutilated. But then on the man's side, too, are there any tips or things they could do if they have been circumcised, to really reconnect and figure out ways to deal with that?
Yeah, well, I think as first we need to look at it. The evidence is really interesting. There's at least some preliminary studies where people are, men are asked questions about their circumcision. Are they happy they were circumcised? Are they not happy they were, all this kind of stuff. What you find is that men who are really glad they were circumcised typically have not ever looked at any of the information about circumcision, so don't understand what's actually been lost.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult for men to even look at it. I was talking to a guy the other day who is not circumcised, and he talked about how traumatic it was for him being uncircumcised because he felt so embarrassed when they would have to change in gym class.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Because he felt like a freak. And the reality was he had the normal penis. I put up a video recently on my Facebook page of the great little short documentary, little mini doc comedy made about circumcision. And there's a guy trying to defend it. And he says, well, I want my penis to look, I don't want it to look weird. So they walk up to this group of girls and they say, hey girls, does this penis look weird? And they show an uncircumcised penis and the girls are like, yeah. And then they go, does this penis look weird? And they show a circumcised penis and the girl goes, yeah. And then they go, all penises look weird.
I know.
We've seen that. That's
a
pretty
hilarious
funny.
video.
It's funny, right? So it's true. So, they kind of look weird either way. So this whole thing, so I think one is looking at the information, reading about it. There's a book I have posted up on my website and my book list, called Circumcision, the Hidden Trauma, which I think is a must read for just about anybody who has a penis or vagina, I think should read this book.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. But additionally, I think a quick tip would be, guys, keep some kind of high quality salve in your house that you use specifically on the glands of your penis. It needs to be kept hydrated and moisturized. And if you want to take that further, it would be wearing things that don't abrade it. You can picture what jeans, like denim, would do. Like, girls, you can picture this listening. Imagine if you retracted the hood of your clitoris and then rubbed your clit all day along denim. I mean, doesn't sound that pleasant, but this is what's going on for guys who are circumcised. Men, honestly, I think there is some men's work that can be done, and that's some deep emotional introspection. And what happens my experience is exploring the circumcision trauma. There are memories. You might not remember it extrinsically, you remember it intrinsically. It's a memory in your limbic system. Exploring that memory is scary, it's difficult, it's challenging, and stuff comes up that you might not realize is there. As an example, anger against women, anger against your mother. Is one of the pieces that will be there that you might find is there because there's a sense of, Mom, why did you let this happen to me?
Right.
If you're wondering why mom, it's because at that age, 3 days old, you don't really have a relationship with your father yet. Your relationship has been with your mother for 9 months, more, 40 weeks. So it's kind of there's a bit of a contention that can exist between men and their mother, and therefore, as women are very aware, men very often project their mother onto every woman. And so, just as women project their father very often onto many men, there's a tendency to then project that anger and distrust on women onto all the women in your life. And that's a thing I think we really need to look at, is what impact has this had on me? What impact has it, at what level have I hardened my heart because of this trauma? And how can I begin to release that and feel the feelings? They'll eventually pass. But there's a lot of anger too. I mean, for me, there's definitely, and I'm sure the listeners can hear it. It's like, for me, it's frustrating. I seek to live a really natural lifestyle. So realizing that this part of my nature was sort of taken from me before I was old enough to have a choice, really difficult thing. So a lot to explore there.
Hey, Daniel, can we call you right back? For some reason, during our calls, at the very end of the call, it starts to get really staticky. Can we call you right back?
Call me right back.
Cool.
Awesome.
Hang on, guys. We're getting him back.
Guys. This is so good,
This
isn't
is
it?
fascinating, isn't it?
Wow. So this whole circumcision thing.
I have a question for him right when we get him back on the line.
Okay, good. Let's give him another dial here and see if we can get...
Hey, how's that?
Okay, that's
much
perfect.
better. Hey, Daniel, I have a quick question for you. Part of that deep emotional work that you said men might have to delve into to really get to, heal from some of this past trauma, is kind of going into that rebirthing yourself a really big deal for guys? Like going to create a new birth? Does that really help a lot of people in recovery?
I think that it really does. And when I say that, I don't mean it in this, it's hard. It sounds so kind of new agey to me, and I don't like that, but it does. I've done this kind of work, this rebirthing work, or this limbic, recoding. And I think it's really valuable for everybody to do. But I think for men, it's absolutely important to go back to our earliest memories, because what's happening is our earliest memories these are our foundational impressions about our world, right? So if if I bring you to my house for the first time and the second I open the door and you step in, you get punched in the face.
Right.
What would you think? My house would now forever, there would be this association that this place was potentially unsafe.
Right.
Your first experience of the planet, typically if we've had a hospital birth, it's a very traumatic experience because it's a very intense environment with masked people, with beeping machines and lights and all these kind of crazy sounds and people panicking. And then right after that for boys, then all of a sudden we get cut. We literally get cut, mutilated on the most sensitive part of our body. So yeah, there's a sense that, oh my God, this is a world I can't fully trust. Do you see that in a lot of men, that sense of, I can't trust this world, it's not safe for me here? I mean, it's pretty pervasive in our culture.
Yeah.
It's very pervasive. What do you think, Daniel, about this whole idea of, people in our chat room are talking about the pair bond and being, with people for significant, periods of time, one person for every person, you have a soulmate and you should be with them forever.
Your soulmate who happens to be born at the same town as you is usually how that works, right?
Exactly, right.
My soulmate, we happen to go to the same high school. Thank you, God, for being so convenient.
It's shocking.
Okay. So we're talking about the circumcision piece because it's important to understand how dysfunctional we are sexually before we start to talk about functional sexuality. But if we're going to talk about functional sexuality, I think, well, we first need to understand that natural human beings, and we're going to talk about what their relationship structures are like. But this is a little bit awkward because in our culture, we're not trying to have children as often. We're separating sex from childbirth, and that's a little bit of a weird, unnatural thing to do. People in natural societies don't just have sex for children. It's just that they don't mind having children.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Right? It's like a byproduct.
It's a byproduct, right? Yeah. And the more children, the better in a tribal society. The more children, the better. That's what you want to do. And so women very often, incidentally, one of the big challenges women have in this culture when it comes to their menstrual cycles, and if you want to learn more about that, my partner Alexandra at wildwomenspeaks.com, her focus is on natural menstrual cycles, but one of the big challenges she and I have run into in this work is that natural women don't have a lot of menstrual cycles because natural women are pregnant a lot.
Wow,
and then they're lactating and feeding children a lot. So the average indigenous woman would have very few menstrual cycles through the course of her lifetime. Whereas women in our culture are having a menstrual cycle every month. Month after month after month after month after month after month after month for years. And there is some evidence that might be a contributing factor to certain types of female cancer. So this is interesting stuff. Natural women would want to be pregnant much more often. So they wouldn't spend so much of their lives as looking for those. The sexuality would be different because they'd be pregnant a lot and they'd be lactating a lot. That said, when we look at natural humans, hunting and gathering, foraging peoples, we see that there are three dominant types of relationship structures throughout the world. Our culture really only has one, right? That's one man, one woman. And we're expected, this is loosening, of course, we've all witnessed this over the last couple decades, but we're expected to find one person and then stay with that person forever, and then we set up a legal contract called a marriage that creates a corporation out of you and your partner, and you're expected to spend your whole lives only with each other. There is this idea, a lot of us don't consciously prescribe to it, but there is this idea that you really should only have been with one person your whole life, right? Even though I'm sure both of you have had sex with other people besides each other. I certainly have had sex with other people besides my partner throughout my life. Most of us have been in serial monogamous relationships. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, like probably both of you have been in multiple, over the course of your life, many different monogamous relationships. So you may be monogamous, but you're serially monogamous. Even if you two were to stay in a relationship now the rest of your life, that wouldn't erase the other relationships you've had, right?
Right.
So when we look around us, we see that people are largely, they're in a serial monogamy. That's typical. When we look at our young people, we see that they tend to be more promiscuous. And some adults are promiscuous, but we don't see that as much. And I don't mean promiscuous with a negative connotation. I mean that's having sex with partners without the context of relationship. right? It doesn't mean it has to be indiscriminate and reckless. It just means that you're not in the confines of a relationship, but you're still sexually active with other partners, right? That's fairly common in young people. And when we look at indigenous people, we see it's fairly common in their indigenous young people as well. There comes a point, though, where people tend to get into a relationship structure. In our civilization, it's just expected it's going to be with one person. We do see monogamy in indigenous cultures, but we see a couple different types of monogamy. So I think it's important we break those down because we don't have words for this yet in our culture as applies to us. The first one we'll see is that kind of serial monogamy. That's very common. So we'll see that somebody is in a relationship with somebody else, and when that relationship starts to wane or not work anymore, they simply go into new relationships. But because they don't have the same kind of legal marriage structure till death do us part, it's just not a big deal. Think about all the trauma that goes on in our culture because people divorce.
Yeah.
Where it's only because they've set up this crazy structure. They took vows before God to death. Literally, right? Like, we'll stay together till one of us is dead, no matter what. Like,
yeah, whether we're happy or not, right?
Right. And then, so that's, yeah, exactly. So that's one challenge that people do that we don't see that. It's not a natural thing for us. So it's very common. Divorce is actually a natural human experience. It just doesn't need to come with all of the legal battle, all of the anger, all of the hatred, all of the destruction of family units. It's actually a fairly natural thing. So we see that serial monogamy, people going from relationship to relationship. We see this other thing, and this piece I think this is really important for people to hear. This next piece is called social monogamy. Social monogamy. This is, I think, the most important, and this is kind of what people are alluding to, I think, in the chat room there. One of the things that we see with indigenous cultures is that two people will be socially monogamous in that when they're around people, they're a monogamous couple. But behind the scenes, they may have one or more lovers.
Oh, okay.
There are so many different ways this works in so many different societies, so I want to be clear here. I'm not saying this is every indigenous society, but when we look at indigenous societies, we see this pattern emerges. Sometimes both partners are just totally okay with it. Sometimes the society has rules set up for how this can work. Sometimes the partners are not happy about it. We have that certainly in our culture too, don't we?
Right.
But in our culture, we call it cheating. And what's interesting about the cheating phenomena is it implies that there's a game being played, doesn't it?
Right, yeah, like intrinsically within the wording of that.
Right, because you're in a mono game. And in the mono game, if you go outside of it, you're cheating. And if you're cheating, does that help you to win it? Is there a winning? What does this mean? What are we talking about, right?
Yeah, interesting.
Right. So what we see is that there is in natural humans an understanding that lifelong sexual monogamy is not necessarily a very realistic thing for everybody. There's certainly people who do it, but many, many societies that are very long lasting understood that this is not something that human beings can be expected to do. Or should be expected to do, and so it's built in that there are other sexual partners that can happen throughout the course of that monogamous relationship. The third thing, go ahead.
No, it's just interesting too with this whole idea because in our culture, divorce is so like you were just mentioning. Divorce is so difficult now. You know, divorce is it's so easy in one sense, but the transferring of goods and giving people different parts of your estate and all this stuff and going through legal court battles.
It's brutal.
Yeah, it's brutal. Yeah.
It's brutal. It's two people who loved each other more than anybody become two people who hate each other more than anybody. And so many people are hurt and society's hurt. And I don't have all of my divorce statistics in front of me right now, but there is that tendency to think about divorce in a really negative way. And there's that tendency to think, oh my God, it's just getting worse and worse. The reality is divorce is actually it's actually really leveling out. But for a very long time, people weren't really allowed to divorce. And so after people were allowed to divorce you could divorce if you had a reason. So, in the past, you would have had to go to court and show that you had some reason. The person had an adulterer, the person had abused you, some reason. Now you can just divorce because you want to. And so when that happened, we saw a big rise in divorce. But the reality is divorce is probably about 50%, and that's actually normal. We see that across indigenous cultures too. So that's, I think, really valuable to know is that's normal, that's natural. In other words, we could say that's adaptive or healthy. And that changes the game, doesn't it? When you go, wait a second, that's actually just normal. I don't have to have a negative about that. What I would say is, really, if you want to get married, really question what structure you want to set up. Because people act as if there's no options, and it's like everybody just does the same type of marriage. It's like you got a lot of options here, and you don't necessarily have to do a legal marriage, or you can set it up any way you want it, but free your mind a little bit when it comes to how you structure your relationship.
Yeah.
The other piece would be the last one would be sexual monogamy, and that is actually sexually exclusive monogamy. That is the rarest form of monogamy, yet that's the form we expect in our culture, and most people do not really sit down and negotiate this. They just assume that they're sexually monogamous with the other person, right? It just comes along with the relationship. I think all of us who are listening either have personally had a partner so-called cheat on us, have cheated on a partner, maybe both, or at least know people where this has happened. I mean, it's actually so common. I struggle to find one relationship I know where that hasn't happened.
Yeah, it's funny how that works because, we're taught to not be that way because we're taught throughout everything in our society, like you were saying earlier, we're taught sex, and then you were told no sex and be monogamous and only do this one thing. But on the flip side, you're taught everything opposite of what they want you to do. It's so strange.
And then now once you're in that sexually monogamous relationship, what happens is you still are being bombarded with the same sexually provocative advertising all the time, right?
It's crazy.
So you're still being stimulated just as much. And that brings us back to the porno thing and eventually to this idea of cheating. Now, imagine I have this kind of, I have an amazing primary pair bond, and that's what Allie and I call our relationship the primary pair bond. That's the zoological term for two animals that join together in this way. And we like to call it that because I don't like all the connotations of the other terms. Now, I can turn to my partner and tell her I'm attracted to another woman. That is something that's a luxury in this world, right? That's difficult for a lot of couples to be able to talk about, right? So as a man, one of the things, being that I find myself attracted to women every day, all day long. That's a natural, normal expression of my masculinity. I used to experience this thing, I call it the urinal neck syndrome. When two guys go to the urinals in the bathroom, there's this real rigid neck thing. Your neck freezes because you don't want to turn your head either way because you don't want anyone to think you might be looking. Right? There's that sort of sense like if I'm walking with my partner and an attractive woman walks by, I get that lock up in my neck. Like I gotta make sure I don't look. Like I don't want to create tension here. Yeah. All this stuff that comes from people trying to hold each other to some. And by the way, I understand that there's a completely flip inverse. I'm just talking as a male in a male body. So I know we could flip this and the females could have their sort of reciprocal story here. But because we have not developed comfort in our culture around being able to even communicate openly about this, everybody's in this deep state of repression and suppression, right? So we feel suppressed, we feel oppressed by the culture, we feel suppressed by the partner, and we feel repressed by ourselves. And these three factors work to shrink us down into less powerful people. So I think, one, we've got to be able to be open and honest about our sexuality, but we also need to allow our partners to be that way too. And that's a scary, slow process for a lot of us, but we can let it unfold. But I think that this idea of exclusive sexual monogamy is something we need to really examine. I'm not suggesting, by the way, if you're listening to this and you're happy in your sexually monogamous relationship, I'm not suggesting you change it. But a lot of us weren't happy that way and want to be able to explore it, and we should be free to do that without judgment. And by the way, we call a lot of this stuff alternative arrangements or alternative lifestyles. That word, alter native. In other words, it's an alteration of what's natural or native, right? This isn't an alternative. This is what's natural. Sexual monogamy is an alternative. That I think we need to be clear about. That's not normal. And it's not normal in the animal world. So forever, the fundamental world of fundamental religion always wanted to point to different animals that they would say were sexually monogamous. Almost all of those, through genetic testing, we now see are not. So what's going on in the animal world is social monogamy. You see the two swans together and you think, oh, they're a couple, but really both swans are having sex with other partners, but not in front of each other. They hide it.
That's so interesting. Yeah, because that's an argument that's brought up a lot. There's a lot of people that talk about the different animals, like you said, the swans, and there's a handful of them that come up every now and then, and you've seen them. and it's just interesting that if you really look deep, they're not that way, right?
Almost all of them, yeah. Almost every single case. In addition to that, what animals are doing is absolutely off the hook weird, because what we see is that, first of all, like all these so-called alternative lifestyles, we see that homosexuality is rampant throughout the animal world. Not just, I'm talking about so common that there are some people who believe it exists in all mammals. Right? It's certainly how dolphins, males start their life off. Two male dolphins pair off as two males, become lovers long before they ever seek out female lovers. This is true of giraffes who are having anal sex with each other. This is true of bison that are, the idea that this is like, well, homosexuality, that's unnatural. Not true. Group sex, oh, that's unnatural. Actually, not true. We see that happens with animals as well. We see oral sex with animals. We see masturbation with animals. Go ahead and Google Google dolphin masturbating with fish.
Yeah, I've heard people talk about that. Yeah.
Right. So here you got dolphins. We always think of, they're so much like us. Their brains are so similar to ours. They communicate like us. Yeah, they do. They also have group sex. They also have homosexual sex. They also masturbate with objects, sex toys. So I'm not talking about just regular masturbation. I'm talking about taking something and using it like a fleshlight, like a sex toy.
Right.
They do that. So there's all these aspects of our sexuality that we have deeply, deeply repressed. And I think it's just, we think of them as all alternatives, when in reality they're actually quite normal. I want to go back to one other piece, because we talked about all of these types of monogamy, but what we didn't hit on, and this is really important, is that in natural people, polygyny is also as common as monogamy. So that's where one male has multiple female partners. That is as common in natural humans as monogamy. And there is polyandry as well. That's when a female has multiple male partners. Now that's the least common. It doesn't exist that often, but it does exist. And so we have this idea that it's like either you're promiscuous, you're celibate, you're monogamous, when there's actually a precedent in the natural world of humans, Homo sapien, the animal, for having all kinds of arrangements. From one partner to multiple partners to changing partners to promiscuity. All of this stuff that people are doing, and we're doing all that in our culture, we just hide it. So one piece I want to, when we're talking about polyandry here, or we're talking about polygyny, I want to be clear that there are a lot of couples that have either bringing other people into their relationship, or they bring other couples into their sexual relationships. This is going on all around us all the time, and a lot of people listening are going, wow, he's talking about that? But that's going on. People do this. And this is actually normal. This is actually natural for us, because we use, as Homo sapiens, sex to make babies, but we also use sex for social bonding.
Do you think there's any difference between what is normal or natural versus what is healthy? Do you think there's any gap there?
Express that in another way. So
well, like for example, like if we were to look back, like this is an example, I've mentioned a couple times. Like let's say I were to look back just for, in food, for example, if we were to look back, and say 30,000 years ago, everyone ate Twinkies. Would it be okay? Like there's a gap between.
Oh yeah, great question.
That doesn't mean it's okay.
So when we look back 30,000 years, people weren't eating Twinkies. That's a hyperbole, right? So we actually, this is a really, really good question. It's difficult to find examples of things that we did ancestrally that weren't good for us, only because we are adapted to what we did in the past.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So to say, well, that wasn't good for us. No, see, our bodies were so perfectly adjusted to how we've lived for 200,000 years that changes in that have to be incredibly slow and incremental. And the problem that we've run into is we changed everything in the last 10,000 years so fast that our bodies haven't been able to adjust. Now, I understand the question, and I want to be clear that what I'm trying to say is not this is how human beings live. I'm not trying to say human beings are just having promiscuous sex all the time naturally. They're not. They have relationship structures. But what we see is if we look at hunter-gatherers around the world, we see lots of kinds of structures that range from promiscuity through monogamy and styles of monogamy, through styles of polyandry, polygamy, and other forms of multiple pair bonds. We see all of it. So what I'm trying to say is that a person should feel comfortable and safe to choose where on that spectrum they want to be and their partner wants to be, without fear of being ridiculed or ostracized by their society. Now, is something unhealthy today for you? Maybe. But for somebody else, maybe not. The problem we've had is we've really restricted other people's behavior, because what we do sexually is we police each other and we self-police. So if imagine, let's say that the both of you decided to bring a third party into your relationship, or you decided to let your partner have sex with somebody else. That's probably not polite dinner conversation when you have friends over, right?
Right.
Because you can sense not only will it become awkward, but you know that people will judge you. So what we do is we suppress and repress, right? We hide things, and then they burn inside of us, like toxic inside of us, and we feel alone, and we feel like we can't share. So the point of this is, I'm not trying to project any changes onto anybody's sexuality. I'm trying to say, if you're already somebody who's doing something alternative or interested in something alternative, know that you're just being a natural human animal. We are the most like bonobos. Right? Bonobos and chimpanzees are our closest relative. The chimpanzee is the chimpanzee and the bonobo are very closely related. They're different species, but almost identical. The chimpanzee has a social structure a lot like the one that we've been living in. It's very warlike. It's very male-dominated. And males control the females, and they believe they use sex only for reproduction, or primarily for reproduction, in the way that we sort of have been sold that throughout our Christian era. Bonobos are different. They're very different. They're more matriarchal. The culture is more run by the females. They don't have war. They don't have killing of each other the way that we do with chimpanzees. Chimpanzees kill each other and sometimes even eat each other. Bonobos don't do that. But bonobos keep the peace by having incredibly free liberal sex. So in bonobo society, the women have sex with women, the males have sex with males, just about any partner can have sex with anybody else. It's almost like the most off the wall. I forget the statistic. I think they have sex on average every 2 hours.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Now, it's not human sex. It's not, 8 positions over the course of 2 hours with, it's not that. They're very quick sessions, right? They're 5 seconds long, 10 seconds long, but they're constantly all having sex with each other, and they do that in order to diffuse tensions within the community.
Okay.
And that allows them to live in a peaceful society, whereas chimpanzees, who look almost identical, I mean, you wouldn't even really be able to tell the difference, unless you were, trained to. The chimpanzee does not have that, and they have a male-dominated, testosterone-rich, war-laden culture, right? It's very different. So one of the things that I think is going on in our society is, by repressing our natural inclination towards a more liberal sexuality, we've actually created a very chimp-like society, which is male-dominated and which is warring. And that, I believe we're coming to sort of the limits of that. I think we're starting to perceive the limits of that, and it's starting to change. And if I can contribute anything to that, it would be to say, hey, not only should, because we hear it all the time, you shouldn't judge people for their lifestyle. Not only should you not judge people for their lifestyle, but what they're doing is actually as natural or normal as anything else.
It's interesting. So the title of this is Sacred Sexuality. And in closing up, I just want to ask you a little bit about bringing a little bit of that sacredness in, because a lot of people are doing that these days, and bringing more meaning to their sex lives and things like that. If people are, going to go down one of these roads and figure out what works best for them, is there a level of learning and spirituality that needs to be sort of gotten into before they just kind of recklessly go into these types of things? Or is there even a reckless way to go into them?
Well, I think that doesn't it reveal sort of our underlying, I don't want to pick on you, Justin. I want to point out that what you just said is what most of us would say. And it illustrates this belief that comes to us from Freudian psychology. Freud said and thought and believed that if we didn't control people, the whole world would just devolve into savage barbarism. And notice that in your question, buried in it, is the idea that if we just set people sexually free, it's just going to be reckless and dangerous, right? It's just going to go badly. Mm-hmm. It's just everyone's just going to go crazy, right? So we have to control ourselves. That's that last 2,000 years Christian era belief, right? If we don't force ourselves to do something unnatural, we'll just go wild, and it's going to be dangerous and it's going to be bad. As if we're not self-regulating, right? Right. So I think that we have to be really conscientious about that, because that comes from sex negative programming. That's a taboo. It's a paradigm. And so we're not aware that we even think that negatively about our sexuality. The reality is, if you were to loosen up about not you guys personally, but if people were able to loosen up about their beliefs about sexuality, they're not just going to run out and start getting crazy here, right? It's not going to be Girls Gone Wild Part 9. Right. It's going to start with thinking about, actually, okay, and I want to tie this all together. What would happen is you would start to become more conscious of your actual sexuality. Doesn't mean you even have to do anything. Doesn't mean you have to go do anything different. It's just you start to be honest with yourself, and you allow your partner to be honest about themselves. That makes us more conscious about our sexuality. The truth of Tantra or sacred sexuality is remaining conscious during the sex act. It's not dissociating psychologically from your body.
Ah, okay.
Right?
Okay.
Right? We can't do that until we can actually be honest about our sexuality. And if we can't be honest about our sexuality, we can never have sacred sexuality. Does that make sense? Because we're already in a place of denial. And if we're in a place of denial, then we're not able to consciously look at the truth of ourselves. And if we can't consciously look at the truth, how can we have conscious tantric sex?
I see.
We might have really good sex, but it's in a way, it's almost like dishonest, because you're coming to the bedroom with less than your complete self.
Right. Very fascinating. And one final question here. We got a good question in the chat room. I just want to see if you got any thoughts about this. They asked about STDs, and they said if sex became more open, wouldn't there be even more of a spread and outbreak of STDs? Any advice or any knowledge on why STDs are such in high levels in our society, and what to do about that?
Yeah, well, this is a really complicated question, and there's a lot there. I'll try to be brief here, but just like many communicable diseases, they barely exist in indigenous societies because human beings aren't so pressed together. One of the problems with civilizations is it breeds pandemic illnesses because everybody's so close together. And that allows for these pathogens to transmit between people really readily. That said, the STD thing, which is very real and does exist, and I'm not in a denier of that, but I also know that we came through an educational campaign very similar to what we got about drugs. So at some level, we've almost been slightly miseducated and a little, it's kind of like, does terrorism exist? Yes. Have we been convinced, though, that terrorists are hiding under every blade of grass? Right. Yes. Right? Here's what's going on with sex, and I think I think everybody can get this regardless of where you stand on this issue. We call sex with condoms, we call that safe sex, right? What's the implication?
Sex is not safe.
Sex is dangerous.
Yeah.
Sex is dangerous, right? Now there's a movement away from calling it safe sex. They want to call it safer sex because no sex is safe. Do you see that? Even with condoms, you could still get a communicable disease. Therefore, it's only safer sex. In other words, all sex, no matter what you do, is risky and dangerous. This sets up in our minds this idea that the one thing you are most driven to do in this world, the thing that motivates you more than anything, is reckless and dangerous.
Right.
How different would you feel about sex if instead we had a healthy sex campaign? So imagine the different, how does that affect your brain, right? One is like danger, oh my God, danger, Will Robinson, danger, like, one is like, oh my God, your head might explode or something. Dangerous. Healthy is a completely different energy, right? So it's like, this is healthy sex and this is not healthy sex. This is sex that could be potentially unhealthy for you. That would change how you saw it. Now, we need to be conscientious about sexually transmitted diseases. I don't want to spend too much time on this. It's a very personal topic, but I think that we've been made more afraid than is necessary. And I think if every individual who's sexually active has a duty to go out and learn about these so-called STDs or so-called because some of them are, I don't know, some of them are not quite as dangerous as we've been told. Some of them are more common than we've been told. And some of them are incredibly dangerous. And there are sexually transmitted illnesses that a lot of people are not aware of. For instance, we now know Lyme's disease, spirochetes from Lyme's disease can be sexually transmitted. I don't know people who even worry about that. Think about that. But I think that's a really big deal. Imagine your partner gets bit by a tick and gets Lyme's disease. They could potentially communicate that to you. So it's our duty to become more conscientious about what are sexually transmitted diseases, what they do, how they're transmitted, and what our risks actually are, so that we don't move forward in the world with a sex negative mindset thinking that everybody is a potentially deadly or dangerous to us.
Yeah, it's funny because with this whole STD thing, it's sort of like with everything in the modern medical world, is that you just throw drugs or throw things at it, and it's just it causes us as a culture, causes us as people to not have to take responsibility and to start looking at these things in a very open way. It's just we can throw pills at things, and people just keep going down their same lifestyle because they have these pills. It's really strange.
Yeah, and most of us are not really aware of what these diseases are. There's a sense of almost, they're just almost mythical to most people, and everybody just assumes, well, if you just smear it on you, you just get it or something, right? It's like, I think it's important that we really educate ourselves. There are certainly concerns. There are concerns that people are not aware of, that they should be aware of, and then there are concerns that people have that sometimes are inflated. So it's important we find a balanced place. But ultimately, I think you should know your partners. You should be paying attention to what your partner's, the health status of your partner, and you should be having healthy sex, not necessarily safe sex, but healthy sex.
Fascinating stuff. So in closing, are there any books that you would recommend people, or are you going to be doing a thing in your magazine series about this?
I am going to do something in my magazine series. I really like Christopher Ryan's book, Sex at Dawn. I think was an incredible read. And he's an amazing guy. I just did a podcast with him, just met him. A fantastic guy. I got to be on stage with him recently. There are some really heavy, aggressive rebuttals to his book, and they're worth reading too, I think, to get a really balanced perspective. So I really liked the book Sex at Dawn, and I also really like the rebuttal book, Sex at Dusk, and I found reading both of those books together gave me an incredibly balanced perspective on how all this works. If you're looking and you're interested in setting up a more alternative relationship structure, there are books like The Ethical Slut, which are worth reading. And they may not be at all what you're looking to set up, but they help you understand a little bit of what's possible, because there is a big range of possibilities, and we've only been selecting from a very narrow piece of that spectrum. Wow. So I think it's good to blow your mind a little bit so that you can kind of go, okay, wow, that all seems crazy. What do I actually want? Because I think most of us don't want what we're forced into, but we don't know what else to turn to. Yeah, I think it's so important to open your mind and to read and expose yourself to podcasts like this or other shows, Daniel, that you do shows all over the internet, and reading books like this. I think it's so important because once you do that, you start realizing how other people in the world live, and you start understanding that, hey, this world that I live in, that I created, it's not necessarily the way everyone else lives. And so you start... Yeah, it's my paradigm. Yeah. And I have on my website, if you go to danielvitalis.com, there is an area on the site called Bookshelf, and that's where all my, my book recommends are kept. Oh, cool. And I have it broken down, so they're into different categories, and there's one on sexuality, and so you can click on that and see a list of books that I've really liked, that have really helped me in creating a relationship. And by the way, if you're listening to me going, well, what's this guy have to say about it? I want to say that I'm in an incredible relationship and very happy in that relationship, and we continue to grow together, and very successfully. In fact, I feel like I'm in a more successful relationship than just about anybody I know. But we maintain that by constantly growing and constantly focusing on this aspect of ourselves, and constantly giving each other more and more freedom to be truly and honestly who we are, with less and less repression from one another and less repression from our culture. Yeah, I mean, the quote in the song is so true. If you love something, set it free, I mean, it's just so true. Yeah. Well, thanks, Daniel, for being on the show. Can you hold on the line for just a moment? We're going to close out the live show here.
I want to thank everyone for being on the podcast live, the radio show live. We really appreciate it. All you guys in the chat room, amazing stuff and amazing questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but we really appreciate it. This is episode 263 with Daniel Vitalis. So we'll put the show notes and all the books that he talked about, links to his website where you can sign up and join him on Facebook and all that stuff on episode 263. And don't forget to join us tomorrow for our Free for All Friday show and then all of the guests we have next week. And we want to thank all of you guys for being a part of it. It was a lot of fun.
That was fun. It was juicy.
It was juicy.
Life is juicy.
So thanks everybody for being on the live show, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Exactly. You got it.
I love it. All right.
Thanks so much, and be in touch.
Yeah, thanks a lot,
Daniel.
dude. I really appreciate it.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye. So there you have Mr. Daniel Vitalis.
Mr. Daniel Vitalis is very beloved in the chat room.
He never ceases to expand your awareness and open your mind, does he?
Somebody ended up in the chat room at the very end after we signed off the live show saying they would love to hear capitalized DV talk about this topic again.
Really?
Yeah, Daniel Vitalis has a new nickname.
DV, I
capital
like it.
DV. But yeah, I think people are going to find that very interesting talk, isn't it?
Yeah, really a lot of taboo stuff that he talked about. Interesting. I thought it was interesting his answer to my question when I asked him about just because people did things in the past, does that necessarily make it healthy or correct? And he was saying that the adaptiveness that they've had in their society, which caused the generations to be able to reproduce and create us, is what was so intrinsically interwoven with their ability to stay healthy and reproduce. I thought that was interesting. So, not like he said, they didn't eat Twinkies; they did these things, and those things are the things that eventually created us.
Yeah.
Interesting, huh?
There's so much to unpack from that episode.
Yeah, it's
like there's so many things we didn't get into that I would want to. I mean, it would be good to have him on again talking about all that stuff, but yeah, just we didn't even really go into the emotional aspect of what having sex does to you emotionally.
Yeah.
Because I mean, there is some part of me that was cringing a little bit inside where it's like, this is how, animals to me, like orangutans or whatever, I mean, they seem one step away from humans, but they still seem like that animal world to me. So it seems like sexual urges and desires for animals are still a little bit different to me because humans have so much emotional connection.
Right.
So I still feel like, there might be these people needing more things in their sexual experiences. But man, I mean, like he was saying, you have to have two people that are really honest and open and free in a relationship. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of emotionally wrecked people too. Like, if people are going out there, like he wasn't at all suggesting people go, ditch their lifestyle and try some crazy things if that's not what they've been looking for.
I think, yeah.
But at the same time, I'm like, gosh, like it seems like still the emotional aspect is, I'd love to touch more on that. You have to be so okay. I think what he was saying is, basically, if you're being completely 100% honest with yourself, and so is your partner, that those things won't really occur because there won't be that emotional aspect. But most people, I mean, probably in their brain are a very immature level because they've been treated so poorly in past relationships or, quote, cheated on, that a lot of people can't handle that. Yeah. That kind of freedom. You know what I mean?
Yeah, a lot of people can't handle that kind of freedom. And, I think it almost, before you're able to even have this conversation, like he was saying, we have to be open and honest in things. But it's interesting because, I think my question near the end when I talked about the sacredness of sexual, connections with people, my intent with that question was to empower people to really make an informed decision and to really try to understand the other person and partner so that they're not just going out and doing these potentially damaging things. I mean, you can get someone pregnant and then if you're sort of unconscious, you can get someone pregnant and then they could have problems and they could give birth to a child. And then a lot of these people too are, if they just hear something like this and go out and do these types of things, they're filled with pharmaceutical drugs. Maybe not all of them are conscious and aware and open and want to learn and be, there for their partner. And so they just run out and do these things, but they're also, on pharmaceutical medications, or they're on, alcohol, or, like they're just not in a space where they're considering the magnitude of what they're doing. You know, so
Yeah.
you know, you have a lot of damaged people that hear something like this, and
which you have to really be careful of, I think.
yeah. And by damage, I mean, you know, through diet and lifestyle, but also through programming and media programming and things like that have warped our mind. And so, you know, it's just interesting to make the note, I think, to really, you know, inform yourself and not just, I don't know.
Yeah,
I think there's something to that, you know?
Yeah. I'm with you.
Very fascinating stuff about circumcision too. That was crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was funny. I think you had to do something with Maggie
oh my gosh.
But she said, or he said, I brought up the whole thing about soulmates, you know, and he said, oh, isn't it just, it's so convenient that most everyone's soulmate, you know, just happens to live in the same town as they do. Someone's eternal soulmate happens to have gone to the same high school they did. You know, you just kind of joke about it.
I totally missed that part.
Yeah.
You know, what was so funny is when I was out running errands, I had to go get the car serviced this morning because I had a maintenance light on.
Yeah.
And I came back in, and I had also run to the health food store, and there was all these groceries to put away, but I had chicken I had to put in the oven.
Oh yeah.
For lunch today, otherwise I wasn't gonna have anything. And I forgot it had been in there like a half hour, and all of a sudden I smelled burning, and I'm like, oh no! So I had to run out there. So I missed the soulmate part, but no, it didn't burn.
It didn't burn. Good.
No, but it was pretty funny.
Wow.
I would have gotten a chuckle out of that.
Yeah, because we've talked about that. You know, can you have, if you were to just live in today's world and not entertain any of the ideas that Daniel talked about today, but just live a standard life, is there such a thing as multiple soulmates? We've talked about that. You know, I mean, it seems like there is.
I think you could.
Yeah, I mean,
I think personally, I feel like I've had that at the time, and then you compare it to something else greater, and then you go, oh, that didn't seem to be. But at the case, I feel like, or at that time in that case, I felt like, yeah, that was somebody you could feel that way about. You know, it's like, how are we to know if we're going to feel that way forever about someone or something?
I know. Isn't that weird?
You don't know. I mean, at the time, it's so real, and you think there could never be anybody else you could love as much or that you'd connect as much with, and to some extent, I do believe that. But when you're in something, you know, 10 years ago, and you think that's the case for that person who you were at the time,
right?
That's a soul connection at that time.
I know.
And who you were at that time. It could go so many levels of weirdness.
I mean,
you know?
Should you stay with the person for 30, 40, 50 years if you're miserable 5 years after you made that decision?
Right.
I mean...
Right. I
don't know. I mean, that's an individual decision that, you know, people are going to have to make. But if they're miserable with someone, you know, there's a whole load of health problems that arise as a result of that, you know?
Yep. I know.
You know, being stressed and worried. And
emotional diseases are just as bad as some other stuff you have to...
You know, it's crazy.
Yikes.
Yeah, it's crazy. You know, one of the things he was talking about, you know, we talked about this recently about the whole idea of the marriage certificate and, you know, the marriage thing. It's interesting because what I've been learning lately is when two people get married, they're basically two corporations. And what happens is that the husband sues the wife and wins, and that's why the wife or the potential wife, the mate, has to change her. You know, one corporation absorbs another. So if Nike bought, you know, some company that some
Twitter,
some
or
no-name
another shoe company.
Well, some no-name company you know, something that's
Joe's Shoe House.
Yeah, Joe's Shoe House. If Nike bought Joe's Shoe House, obviously they're going to keep the name Nike and bring in Joe's Shoe House. And so that's the same thing that happens when two people get married. You know, the one corporation absorbs the other, which is so strange.
Which, you don't have to change your name, but we're encouraged to. Just a societal thing, just like circumcision. I mean, it
really makes you think a lot about everything in life, doesn't it?
There's so many things we don't know.
Yeah, crazy.
Or aren't aware of.
So this is an interesting show. What did you guys think? Curious to see what you guys think. If you have any thoughts or opinions or any comments about this show, this is episode 263, so there's a comment form on that show page with all the links that Daniel talked about. But then also we're going to put a link to our forum in this show page too, where you can continue the discussion. I have a feeling that our forum is just going to blow up on this thread. People are going to go back and forth, and it's going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So the forum is free to sign up for. It's free to join.
Let's keep it nice.
Yeah, let's keep it nice, everyone. That's you know, I don't want how do I say this? I don't want any crude language or people going back and forth and yelling and screaming. This is a really important thing to...
Or especially with sexual things. I mean, I know it's taboo and, things that, seem taboo or whatever, that we can get a little bit more out there to really seriously talk about these things, but keep it G-rated as well. If you
keep it G-rated. And keep it, keep your intent as someone who's interested in searching and someone who's respectful. Things like that. It's important to have grown-up decisions or grown-up discussions about this. So
how about let's keep it out of the kindergarten.
There you go.
Let's keep it above kindergarten level.
There you go. Yeah. Totally.
But I'm interested to see what, kind of conversations can come out of a great talk like that.
Yeah. So good stuff. Daniel Vitalis, if you're interested in any of his products, you can go to extremehealthradio.com/surthrival, SURTHRIVAL, and you can check out his products. If you go through our link, we'll get a little commission that will help keep the shows free and all of that. And I wanted to let you guys know, if you're interested in that Nutrex product, you can go to extremehealthradio.com/Nutrex or extremehealthradio.com/Vitamix or Qigong, QIGONG, to learn about the different products that we talked about during today's show. So we'll put links to those on this show page 263. And stay tuned for our Free For All Friday show tomorrow.
Going to be a lot of fun.
Next week, we'll be talking about osteoporosis, healing cancer.
That's fun.
yeah. Heart disease, that's fun. Right? Who doesn't love heart
diseases?
Healing cancer?
You got to laugh every once in a while because these things are so serious.
Biomagnetic healing therapy. So
I want to know what that is. Yeah.
Interesting. And in the meantime, I will learn these people's names too.
Yeah, please do. Work on that. Homework for today.
All right, guys, time for us to get out and go enjoy the day. We appreciate you guys so much. Please pass the show on to your friends or to anyone else that you care to share this with, who you think might be interested in our work. We'd greatly appreciate that. And we'll catch you on the next episode. Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
Thank you for listening to this episode.
It's time to go for now, but our mission does not end with this show.
Justin and Kate will be back with another interview packed full of ideas, discoveries, and unique ways to regain your health.
Head on over to extremehealthradio.com/subscribe and instantly download our free gift too, that contains cutting-edge strategies to start making healthy lifestyle changes today.
No material on this blog is intended to suggest that you should not seek professional medical care. Always work with qualified medical professionals, even if you educate yourself in the field of live food, nutrition, and alternative medicine. I'm not a doctor, nor am I offering readers medical advice.